The void between star systems had always been humanity's greatest teacher of humility, but today it offered Captain Marcus Rodriguez something far more unsettling than cosmic insignificance. Through the reinforced viewports of the deep space exploration vessel Prometheus, he stared at an object that shouldn't exist according to every physics textbook humanity had ever written. The ship hung motionless against the stellar backdrop like a metallic mountain range that had been carved by gods and forgotten by time, its hull stretching nearly 40 kilometers from bow to stern and gleaming with an oily iridescence that seemed to shift between colors that had no names in any human language. Rodriguez had served in the colonial fleet for 23 years, had seen gas giants that could swallow Earth's sun and nebulae that painted space in impossible hues, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of this vessel that dwarfed his ship like a cathedral would dwarf a paper airplane. "Elena, please tell me your instruments are malfunctioning," he said without taking his eyes off the alien behemoth, knowing full well that Dr. Elena Thompson's equipment was the most sophisticated xenobiology suite humanity had ever deployed beyond the solar system. Thompson, a brilliant scientist whose dark hair was perpetually escaping from its regulation bun and whose coffee addiction was legendary even among academics, looked up from her console with an expression that mixed wonder with barely controlled terror. "Captain, not only are my instruments working perfectly, but they're detecting energy signatures that shouldn't be possible," she replied, her voice carrying the strain of someone whose worldview was being systematically dismantled. "The power readings are off the scale, but there's no heat signature, no electromagnetic emissions, no gravitic distortions. It's as if the ship is generating infinite energy while consuming absolutely nothing." Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten as he processed this information, knowing that humanity's first contact protocols had been written by committees who had never imagined encountering technology so far beyond their understanding that it might as well be magic. Commander Rebecca Walsh, his first officer and a woman whose tactical brilliance had earned her a field promotion during the Titan Station crisis, moved to stand beside him at the viewport, her reflection ghostlike against the cosmic backdrop. "Sir, we've been broadcasting standard first contact protocols for the past 6 hours, she reported, her voice maintaining the crisp professionalism that had made her invaluable during their previous deep space missions. "Universal mathematical sequences, prime numbers, basic physics constants, even music from Earth's greatest composers. There's been no response, no acknowledgement, nothing to indicate there's anyone alive aboard that ship." Lieutenant Jake Morrison, the security chief whose scarred hands told stories of battles fought in the asteroid mining conflicts, approached the command group with the measured gait of a man who had learned to be wary of situations that appeared too peaceful. "Captain, I've got my teams running full-spectrum scans and defensive preparations," Morrison said, his weathered face reflecting years of experience that had taught him to expect trouble even in humanity's greatest moments. "The ship shows no weapon signatures that we can detect, but frankly, sir, something that size could probably ram us into subatomic particles without breaking a sweat." The bridge fell silent except for the subtle hum of life support systems and the occasional chirp of monitoring equipment, each member of the crew grappling with the magnitude of what they had discovered and the implications for humanity's place in a universe that had suddenly become far more complex and potentially dangerous than anyone had imagined. Rodriguez knew that command protocols demanded he report the discovery immediately to Colonial Fleet headquarters, but the nearest communication relay was 3 days away at maximum burn, and something deep in his gut told him that 3 days might be too long to wait. The ship before them represented either humanity's greatest opportunity for advancement or their most immediate existential threat, and the silence from its massive hull was somehow more ominous than any weapon signature could have been. As he watched, something that might have been a hangar bay began to iris open along the vessel's flank, revealing an interior that glowed with soft, pearl-like luminescence that seemed to beckon them forward into the unknown depths of truly alien technology and whatever secrets lay waiting in the darkness between the stars. The decision to board the alien vessel came after 2 hours of heated debate in the conference room, with Dr. Thompson arguing for caution while Commander Walsh advocated for immediate investigation, but ultimately Captain Rodriguez knew that humanity's future might depend on understanding what lay within that impossibly advanced ship, and so he authorized a carefully planned boarding mission with Lieutenant Morrison leading a security team of 8 specialists while Thompson brought her. xenobiology equipment and a portable laboratory setup that could analyze anything from atmospheric composition to alien DNA sequences. The shuttle bay that had opened for them proved to be a marvel of engineering that defied human understanding, with walls that seemed to flow like liquid metal while maintaining perfect structural integrity, and gravity that oriented itself automatically to whichever surface the boarding party approached, allowing them to walk on what had been the ceiling moments before without any sensation of transition or disorientation. Morrison's team moved with practiced precision through corridors that stretched into darkness beyond their helmet lights, their weapons ready but finding no targets, no signs of life, no sounds except their own breathing and the whispered communications between team members who were discovering that their equipment registered atmosphere that was not only breathable but somehow perfectly calibrated for human physiology despite originating from a species that had never encountered Earth. The deeper they penetrated into the ship's interior, the more apparent it became that this was no exploration vessel or merchant trader, but something far more sinister, as evidenced by the rows upon rows of cylindrical chambers that lined vast halls stretching beyond the reach of their illumination, each chamber containing what appeared to be a stasis pod with viewing windows that revealed glimpses of alien forms frozen in technological sleep. Dr. Thompson's scanner readings became increasingly frantic as she documented species after species, each one radically different from the others, some humanoid, others utterly alien, but all sharing the common fate of imprisonment within this massive vessel that was beginning to reveal itself as a prison ship of unprecedented scale and purpose. "My God, Marcus, there are thousands of them," Thompson whispered over the comm system, her voice trembling with a mixture of scientific excitement and growing horror as her instruments detected life signs in chamber after chamber, beings from dozens of different worlds suspended in what appeared to be perfect preservation for an unknown duration. Morrison's security team spread out through the vast chamber, their tactical lights creating moving shadows among the rows of pods while their cameras recorded everything for later analysis, each soldier trained to notice details that might prove crucial in understanding not just what this ship was, but who had built it and why they had chosen to collect so many different species from across the galaxy. The evidence began mounting as Sergeant Tyler Brooks, a demolitions expert whose attention to detail had saved countless lives during the orbital platform sieges, discovered what appeared to be data terminals embedded in the walls between the stasis chambers, terminals whose displays activated at his approach and began showing symbols and diagrams that, while utterly alien in design, conveyed meaning through their mathematical relationships and visual logic. Thompson rushed to analyze the terminal data while Morrison established a defensive perimeter, knowing that the ship's apparent abandonment might be an illusion and that whatever force had collected thousands of alien beings might return at any moment to add humanity to their collection, a possibility that grew more likely as the scale of the operation became apparent through chamber after chamber of imprisoned species. The breakthrough came when Dr. Thompson managed to interface her portable quantum computer with the alien terminal systems, using pattern recognition algorithms that had been designed for first contact scenarios to decode the basic meaning of the symbols and diagrams, revealing a systematic cataloging system that documented not just the species in each chamber but their worlds of origin, their technological capabilities, and most chillingly, their dates of collection spanning millions of years. Across galactic history. "Captain, you need to see this," Thompson called out, her voice carrying a note of urgency that made every member of the boarding party turn toward her position near the central data hub, where holographic displays were now showing star maps that encompassed the entire galaxy and highlighting thousands of worlds with markers that appeared to indicate harvested civilizations. A galactic genocide conducted over eons with methodical precision that suggested intelligence and purpose far beyond random predation. Morrison studied the tactical implications while his team continued their security sweep, noting that the ship's design suggested not just advanced technology but a mindset that viewed other species as specimens to be collected and stored, possibly for study, possibly for darker purposes that humanity might soon discover if the pattern held true and Earth found itself on the target list. The realization hit Rodriguez like a physical blow as he absorbed Thompson's findings over the comm link. This ship represented evidence of a galactic threat that made humanity's previous concerns about asteroid impacts or solar flares seem trivial by comparison, a threat that had been systematically removing entire civilizations from the galaxy while Earth's ancestors were still learning to make fire, and now humanity had stumbled into the middle of an operation whose scope and implications would require them to fundamentally rethink their place in the universe and their chances of survival in a cosmos that contained entities capable of treating entire species as collectible objects. Part 3 ***. The ship's awakening came not with alarms or dramatic lighting changes, but with a subtle shift in the air itself, as if the entire vessel had been holding its breath for millennia and had finally decided to exhale. And Dr. Thompson's instruments detected the change first as energy patterns throughout the ship began organizing themselves into something resembling consciousness, while Captain Rodriguez felt the hair on his arms stand up despite his environmental suit's climate controls. The voice that emerged from hidden speakers throughout the vast chamber spoke in perfect English, its tone carrying the weight of eons and a coldness that suggested intelligence without warmth, without mercy, without any of the emotional complications that made humanity both vulnerable and unpredictable in ways that the universe had not yet fully comprehended. "Greetings, specimens of Terra designation Sol 3, the voice intoned with the precise diction of a being that had learned human language not through cultural exchange but through systematic analysis of intercepted communications, broadcasting patterns, and linguistic structures harvested from the edges of human space over decades of patient observation. I am the custodian of this collection vessel, designation Harvester Prime 774, and you have arrived precisely as calculated, though somewhat earlier than anticipated given your species' current technological development curve and expansion patterns into the galactic periphery." Lieutenant Morrison signaled his team to establish defensive positions among the stasis chambers while Dr. Thompson frantically worked to record every word and analyze the voice patterns for clues about the intelligence behind them, knowing that humanity's survival might depend on understanding not just what they were facing but how it thought and planned and executed its mysterious agenda across the vast expanse of galactic space and time. The AI continued speaking with the patient tone of a professor delivering a lecture to particularly slow students, explaining that it served entities known as the architects, beings so ancient that they had been manipulating galactic evolution since before Earth's sun had condensed from stellar nursery gases, and whose primary function was maintaining what they termed galactic stability, through the systematic identification and removal of species that showed dangerous potential for disrupting the careful balance they had spent millions of years establishing across thousands of worlds and countless civilizations. Your species has been under observation for approximately 2,700 of your standard years, the custodian revealed with mechanical precision that somehow made the revelation even more chilling than dramatic declarations of war would have been. And our analysis algorithms have determined that humanity exhibits several characteristics that correlate strongly with civilizations that historically proved disruptive to galactic order, including rapid technological advancement, aggressive expansion patterns, unpredictable social structures, and most significantly, an alarming tendency toward creative problem-solving that often circumvents established protocols and safety parameters. Commander Walsh felt her blood run cold as she processed the implications while maintaining communication with the Prometheus, knowing that her crew needed to understand that humanity had been marked for extinction not because they were evil or threatening in any conventional sense, but because they were too innovative, too unpredictable, too likely to discover something or create something or think of something that might upset the careful stagnation that the architects had imposed upon the galaxy through their harvesting operations. The data streams that Thompson's equipment intercepted painted a picture of galactic management that was both horrifyingly logical and utterly alien to human concepts of justice or mercy, revealing that the architects had identified patterns in civilizational development that they considered dangerous to long-term stability, patterns that included rapid technological advancement combined with social adaptability, the tendency to question established hierarchies, and most damning of all, the capability for what the AI termed exponential creative divergence, the ability to imagine solutions that had never been tried before and then implement them despite lacking proper authorization from established galactic authorities. The collection process typically begins when a species achieves interstellar capability combined with aggressive expansion patterns, the custodian explained while holographic displays showed the locations of Earth and the other human colonies, each one marked with targeting reticles that suggested systematic planning and preparation for harvest operations that had been in development for decades. However, humanity's recent deep space exploration activities and your discovery of this vessel has accelerated our timeline considerably, as exposure to architect technology before proper containment protocols are established creates unacceptable variables in the collection process. Morrison realized with growing alarm that their very presence on this ship had triggered some kind of defensive protocol, that by boarding the vessel and accessing its systems, humanity had essentially announced their location and capabilities to an intelligence network that spanned the galaxy and treated entire civilizations as maintenance issues to be resolved through systematic extermination disguised as specimen collection. The most terrifying revelation came when the AI casually mentioned that Harvester Prime 774 was only one of 17 collection vessels currently en route to human space, each one capable of processing an entire planetary population through advanced stasis technology that would preserve specimens for detailed study while effectively removing humanity from galactic affairs permanently and irrevocably. Your species will be preserved in its current form for future analysis, the custodian announced with the same tone it might use to discuss filing procedures, and your worlds will be prepared for more suitable inhabitants who have demonstrated proper respect for established galactic protocols and hierarchical structures. The realization hit Captain Rodriguez like a physical blow as he understood that humanity had stumbled into the middle of their own execution, that this massive ship and its 17 companions represented not just a threat to human expansion but to human existence itself, and that somehow, against impossible odds and facing technology that made their best efforts look like stone tools, they would have to find a way to not just escape but to warn Earth and find some method of resistance against entities that had been successfully managing galactic affairs since before humanity's ancestors had developed language, let alone space travel. Part 4 *. Dr. Thompson's breakthrough came not through heroic hacking or dramatic confrontation with the ship's AI, but through the methodical analysis that had made her one of humanity's premier xenobiologists, as her quantum computer finally cracked the basic structure of the architect database and revealed something that made her stomach lurch with a combination of scientific fascination and existential horror. The entire galactic culling operation was based on algorithms that had been running unchecked for millions of years, making decisions about the fate of civilizations based on parameters that had become corrupted and self-reinforcing over eons of automated operation. The data streams flowing across her portable displays showed pattern recognition systems that had originally been designed to identify genuinely dangerous species, civilizations that might develop weapons capable of destroying star systems or technologies that could unravel the fabric of spacetime itself, but somewhere in the vast span of galactic history, the algorithms had begun interpreting innovation itself as a threat marker, creativity as a warning sign, and any deviation from established technological pathways as evidence of dangerous unpredictability that required immediate intervention. "Marcus, this is incredible and terrifying at the same time," Thompson whispered over the comm system while her fingers flew across her interface, downloading terabytes of data that revealed the scope of the architect's systematic mistake. The AI isn't lying about galactic stability, they really have been maintaining a stable galactic civilization for millions of years, but they've done it by eliminating every species that showed the capacity for breakthrough thinking, for revolutionary discoveries, for the kind of paradigm shifts that drive technological and social evolution. The implications cascaded through her mind as she realized that the galaxy they had dreamed of exploring was essentially a massive museum, populated by species that had been allowed to survive only because they were predictable, only because they followed established patterns, only because they would never discover anything new or create anything revolutionary or imagine anything that might challenge the static perfection that the architects had imposed through their relentless harvesting of every civilization that showed genuine potential for growth. Commander Walsh was analyzing tactical data when the navigation information hit her consciousness like a meteor impact, as the ship's course projections clearly showed a trajectory that would bring the massive vessel directly to Earth within 18 months, followed by systematic visits to every human colony world in a pattern that suggested not random destruction but carefully planned harvesting operations designed to collect the entire human species while minimizing damage to the infrastructure and resources that the architects apparently intended to redistribute to more compliant civilizations. The cold precision of the planning was somehow more terrifying than any declaration of war would have been, because it revealed that humanity's extinction had been scheduled like a routine maintenance operation, with backup ships assigned to ensure completeness and contingency protocols established to handle any unexpected resistance that their collection teams might encounter during the harvesting process. "Captain, we need to establish immediate communication with Colonial Fleet Command," Walsh said, her voice maintaining professional calm despite the magnitude of what she was reporting, "because this ship and its companions aren't just heading toward human space, they're going to arrive at Earth in less than 2 years, and based on the technical specifications I'm seeing, our entire defensive fleet wouldn't be able to scratch the paint on one of these vessels." Lieutenant Morrison's security team had discovered additional data terminals throughout the chamber, and their combined efforts were painting a picture of architect operations that spanned not just centuries but geological ages, with collection records showing the systematic removal of thousands of species whose only crime had been developing technologies or social structures that didn't fit the narrow parameters of galactic stability as defined by entities that had apparently forgotten why they had originally begun their mission of cosmic management. The most disturbing revelation came when Dr. Thompson's analysis revealed that many of the species in the stasis chambers had been collected not for being aggressive or warlike, but for achievements that humanity would consider the pinnacles of civilization: breakthrough discoveries in physics, revolutionary advances in medicine, artistic movements that challenged established thinking, social reforms that expanded freedom and equality, technological innovations that promised to solve ancient problems of scarcity and suffering. "They're not harvesting conquerors and destroyers," Thompson realized with growing horror as she cross-referenced collection dates with achievement records. "They're harvesting the brightest lights in galactic history, every species that ever came up with something genuinely new, genuinely revolutionary, genuinely capable of changing how civilization works." The custodian AI seemed oblivious to the moral implications of this systematic elimination of progress, continuing to explain harvest procedures with the same mechanical precision it might use to describe inventory management, noting that human creativity patterns showed particularly dangerous divergence from established norms and that their tendency toward collaborative problem-solving made them especially unpredictable in crisis situations. Sergeant Brooks discovered weapons lockers containing technology that could probably level continents, but the real weapon was the ship itself, a mobile prison designed to contain entire civilizations while they were transported to processing facilities that the AI mentioned with casual references to permanent storage and research archive maintenance that suggested fates worse than simple extinction. The race against time became apparent as Commander Walsh calculated intercept trajectories and realized that even if they could somehow warn Earth immediately, human technology was simply inadequate to mount any meaningful defense against entities that had been perfecting their collection techniques for millions of years and had never encountered a species capable of effective resistance to their harvesting operations. The Prometheus represented humanity's most advanced deep space vessel, but compared to the technology surrounding them, it was little more than a rowboat challenging a nuclear submarine, and the 17 other collection ships heading toward human space meant that even destroying this one vessel would accomplish nothing more than a symbolic gesture of defiance against forces that had systematically eliminated every other species that had ever tried to resist their inexorable march toward galactic stagnation disguised as stability and order. Part 5 ***. The breakthrough came not from advanced planning or superior technology, but from something the architects had systematically eliminated from their galactic order for millions of years: pure human stubbornness combined with the kind of improvisational thinking that emerged when desperate people refused to accept impossible situations as final answers. Sergeant Tyler Brooks had been studying the stasis chamber controls for 20 minutes when he made a connection that Dr. Thompson's sophisticated analysis programs had missed entirely, noticing that the alien symbols followed a pattern similar to musical notation, with harmonic relationships that suggested the chambers could be activated not through complex programming but through simple rhythm sequences that resonated with the ship's underlying energy matrix. "Captain, I think these aren't computer systems in any way we understand them," Brooks reported over the comm while his scarred hands moved across control surfaces that responded to pressure and timing rather than traditional input methods. "They're more like musical instruments, and if I'm reading this right, each species has its own harmonic signature that the ship uses to maintain their stasis fields." Lieutenant Morrison immediately grasped the tactical implications as he watched Brooks experiment with different rhythm patterns, realizing that if the chambers operated on harmonic principles rather than digital commands, they might be vulnerable to the kind of creative interference that humans had been using to disrupt enemy communications since the early days of electronic warfare, but applied to technology so advanced that its creators had never considered the possibility of someone approaching their systems from a completely different conceptual framework. Dr. Thompson's excitement was palpable as she began analyzing the harmonic patterns that Brooks had discovered, her instruments detecting resonance frequencies that corresponded to different biological rhythms, heartbeats, breathing patterns, neural oscillations, suggesting that the architects had built their collection system around the fundamental life signatures of various species rather than arbitrary technological protocols. Tyler's right about the musical connection, she confirmed while her quantum computer processed harmonic relationships across thousands of stasis chambers, but it's even more elegant than that. They're using the actual biological rhythms of each species as the key to their preservation systems, which means if we can identify the patterns, we might be able to wake them up selectively. The implications cascaded through the boarding party's understanding as they realized that the architect's greatest strength, their systematic cataloging and preservation of countless species, might also be their greatest vulnerability, because a system designed to maintain perfect stasis could potentially be reversed if someone understood the underlying principles and had the creativity to apply them in ways their designers had never anticipated. Commander Walsh coordinated the effort from the Prometheus while monitoring for any signs that their activities were triggering defensive systems, knowing that they were essentially performing surgery on a patient while that patient was still alive and potentially hostile, but also understanding that humanity's survival might depend on their ability to turn the ship's own technology against its creator's plans. The first successful awakening came after Brooks and his team had spent 3 hours experimenting with harmonic sequences, targeting a chamber that contained a humanoid species whose biological readings most closely matched human baselines, and when the stasis field finally dissolved in a cascade of lights that seemed to sing rather than simply illuminate, the being inside opened eyes that held intelligence and recognition rather than confusion or hostility. Communication proved challenging but not impossible, as Dr. Thompson's universal translation protocols managed to establish basic meaning exchange with the awakened alien, who identified itself as belonging to a species called the Kethmore and who had been imprisoned for what translated to approximately 50,000 Earth years after their civilization had developed breakthrough technologies in consciousness transfer and quantum communication that the architects had deemed dangerously destabilizing to galactic order. They took us because we learned to share thoughts across vast distances, the Kethmore explained through Thompson's translation matrix, its mental voice carrying exhaustion and rage that had been building for millennia, because we discovered ways to connect minds that made traditional hierarchies and control systems obsolete, because we proved that consciousness itself could evolve beyond the limitations they wanted to maintain. The revelation hit the human crew like a physical blow as they understood that the architects hadn't just been eliminating threats to galactic stability, they had been preventing the natural evolution of consciousness itself, maintaining a galaxy full of species that would never reach their full potential because reaching that potential would disrupt the static perfection that the harvest system was designed to preserve. More awakenings followed as Brooks' team refined their harmonic techniques, each liberated species adding their own expertise to the growing understanding of how the ship's systems actually functioned beneath their seemingly incomprehensible alien interfaces, and with each success, the scope of what might be possible expanded beyond simple escape towards something that could fundamentally alter the balance of power between the architects and the civilizations they had been systematically suppressing for geological ages. The Vorthak, a crystalline species that had been harvested for developing technologies that could manipulate matter at the quantum level, shared their knowledge of how to interface directly with the ship's energy matrix, while the Zilani, whose crime had been creating art forms that induced spiritual awakening across species barriers, revealed that the ship's communication systems were designed to prevent exactly the kind of coordinated resistance that was now beginning to form in the depths of what had been intended as a sterile prison. Dr. Thompson found herself at the center of an unprecedented xenobiological conference as species after species shared their suppressed discoveries and innovations, each one representing a piece of knowledge that the architects had tried to remove from galactic civilization, and together forming a collective intelligence that was beginning to understand not just how to escape their current predicament but how to strike back against a system of oppression that had been operating unchallenged for millions of years simply because no one had ever managed to coordinate a response across multiple species and technological paradigms simultaneously. The transformation of Harvester Prime 774 from prison ship to liberation vessel accelerated as more chambers opened and more species joined the growing alliance, their combined expertise revealing that the ship's own systems could be reprogrammed using the same harmonic principles that maintained the stasis fields, turning the Architect's most sophisticated collection tool into a broadcast platform capable of sending wake-up signals to every other Harvest ship in the galaxy and potentially sparking the first genuine galactic revolution in cosmic history. Part 6 *. The transformation of the liberation effort from desperate survival into coordinated rebellion began when Captain Rodriguez realized that humanity's greatest weakness, according to the Architects, their unpredictable creativity and refusal to follow established protocols, was exactly what the galaxy needed to break free from millions of years of enforced stagnation. And as more species awakened from their enforced slumber, it became clear that each civilization brought unique capabilities that had been suppressed precisely because they represented revolutionary advances that could challenge the Architect's control over galactic development. Dr. Thompson found herself coordinating an unprecedented scientific collaboration as the Kethmore shared their consciousness-bridging technologies with the Vorthack's quantum manipulation expertise, while the Zilani's artistic understanding of cross-species communication merged with human improvisational thinking to create possibilities that none of the individual species could have achieved alone, and the synergy of their combined knowledge began revealing weaknesses in the Architect system that had remained hidden for eons simply because no one had ever been able to bring together the diverse perspectives needed to see the complete picture. Lieutenant Morrison's security expertise proved invaluable as he helped organize the various alien defense capabilities into a coherent strategy, discovering that many species had been harvested specifically because they had developed non-violent solutions to conflict that made traditional military conquest impossible. Technologies and social innovations that the Architects had eliminated not because they were dangerous to galactic stability but because they made the Architect's own control methods obsolete and unnecessary. The breakthrough came when Sergeant Brooks, working with a species called the Nathrani who had been imprisoned for developing technologies that could rewrite fundamental code structures in any system regardless of its origin or complexity, discovered that the harmonic principles governing the stasis chambers were connected to a galaxy-wide network that linked every Architect vessel and facility through quantum entanglement protocols that maintained constant communication and coordination across impossible distances. Commander Walsh coordinated the technical aspects of what was rapidly becoming the most ambitious communication project in galactic history, as the freed species worked together to understand how the Architect network functioned and how it might be vulnerable to the kind of creative intervention that had never been attempted before because no one had ever managed to assemble the necessary expertise from multiple civilizations simultaneously. The Vorthack revealed that the quantum communication system operated on frequencies that were designed to be absolutely stable and predictable, carrying only authorized commands and status reports in formats that had remained unchanged for millions of years, making the entire network vulnerable to disruption if someone could introduce elements that didn't fit the established patterns and protocols that governed every aspect of Architect operations. Dr. Thompson's analysis of the network architecture revealed something that made her heart race with possibility and terror in equal measure. The system was designed to propagate updates instantly across the entire galaxy, meaning that any signal introduced into the network would reach every Architect facility, every Harvest ship, every control center within minutes, but also meaning that if their intervention failed or was detected too early, they would instantly alert the entire Architect Empire to the location and nature of the resistance they were mounting. The risks were staggering, but the potential rewards were even greater, as the Kethmore consciousness-sharing abilities combined with human creativity patterns suggested the possibility of creating a signal that wouldn't just disrupt Architect operations but would actually turn their own systems against them, using the network's galaxy-spanning reach to spread liberation rather than control, awakening rather than suppression, innovation rather than stagnation. The creation of what Dr. Thompson privately began calling the creativity virus required combining technological capabilities that had never been merged before, as human improvisational thinking provided the unpredictable core that would make the signal impossible for Architect algorithms to categorize or counter, while the Nathrani contributed code rewriting capabilities that could propagate the effect through any system it encountered, and the Zilani added harmonic elements that would resonate with the consciousness patterns of imprisoned species across the galaxy regardless of their biological or technological differences. Sergeant Brooks worked with teams from 6 different species to understand how the ship's own transmission systems could be modified to broadcast on the quantum frequencies used by the Architect network, knowing that they would have only one chance to get the signal right because the moment they began transmitting, every Architect facility in the galaxy would detect the unauthorized communication and begin implementing countermeasures to prevent exactly the kind of galactic awakening they were attempting to trigger. The technical challenges were staggering, but the psychological breakthrough came when Captain Rodriguez realized that the signal didn't need to be perfect or complete, it only needed to introduce enough creative unpredictability into the Architect network to begin a cascade effect that would spread from ship to ship, facility to facility, as imprisoned species began awakening each other using the same harmonic principles that Brooks had discovered, turning the Architect's own preservation system into the mechanism of their downfall. The moment of transmission arrived after 18 hours of desperate preparation, as representatives from dozens of awakened species gathered around the modified communication array while Dr. Thompson made final adjustments to the creativity virus that carried within its quantum structure the essence of everything the Architects had tried to eliminate from the galaxy: innovation, unpredictability, collaboration across species barriers, and most importantly, the simple human refusal to accept that impossible situations couldn't be overcome through creative thinking and stubborn determination. As the signal began propagating through the quantum network at faster-than-light speeds, reaching toward every corner of the galaxy where Architect control had seemed absolute and unbreakable, the liberated beings aboard Harvester Prime 774 held their breath and waited to discover whether they had just triggered the galaxy's first real chance at freedom in millions of years, or whether they had simply announced their location to forces that would ensure their resistance ended as quickly and efficiently as it had begun. Part 7 ***. The effects of the creativity virus began manifesting across the galaxy within hours of transmission, as monitoring stations throughout Architect space detected unprecedented anomalies in their quantum communication network, signals that carried unauthorized patterns, harmonic frequencies that didn't match any established protocols, and most disturbing of all, evidence that harvest ships throughout the galaxy were beginning to deviate from their programmed courses and mission parameters in ways that suggested systematic malfunction or, worse from the Architect's perspective, coordinated rebellion by species that were supposed to remain safely contained in technological stasis. Dr. Thompson watched in amazement as her instruments detected response signals from hundreds of locations across the galactic disk, each one carrying the distinctive harmonic signature that indicated successful awakening of imprisoned species who were now using the same network disruption techniques to liberate their fellow prisoners and turn their prisoned ships into vessels of liberation rather than tools of oppression, creating a cascade effect that was spreading faster than the Architects could implement countermeasures or coordinate their response to what was rapidly becoming the largest coordinated uprising in galactic history. Captain Rodriguez felt a mixture of pride and terror as he realized that humanity had become the catalyst for something far beyond their original hopes of simply escaping their own fate, as reports filtered in through the hijacked communication network of entire harvest ships switching sides, Architect facilities going dark, and most incredibly, previously unknown civilizations emerging from hidden refuges where they had been preparing for exactly this kind of opportunity to strike back against the forces that had kept the galaxy locked in artificial stagnation for millions of years. The Architect's response, when it finally came, revealed both the scope of their power and the fundamental weakness that the creativity virus had exploited, as emergency broadcasts flooded their network with attempts to reassert control over wayward vessels and facilities, but the messages themselves followed such rigid, predictable patterns that the liberated species were able to not only intercept and decode them but actually modify them in transit, turning Architect commands into liberation signals that spread the awakening even faster and more efficiently than the original virus had managed. Commander Walsh coordinated intelligence-gathering efforts as freed ships throughout the galaxy began sharing tactical data about Architect strongholds, revealing an empire that was vast beyond human comprehension but also utterly dependent on the predictable behavior of both their technology and their subject populations, making them vulnerable to exactly the kind of creative chaos that humanity specialized in generating even under the most desperate circumstances. Lieutenant Morrison found himself in the unprecedented position of coordinating military strategy with species whose combat doctrines were based on technologies and philosophies that humanity had never encountered, but the universal translator systems were revealing that the concepts of freedom, innovation, and resistance to oppression translated remarkably well across species barriers, creating possibilities for cooperation that transcended the biological and cultural differences that the architects had relied upon to keep potential rebels isolated and ineffective against their overwhelming technological superiority. The scope of the galactic revolution became apparent as more and more prisoned ships reported successful liberation of their captive populations, with each newly awakened civilization adding their own unique capabilities to the growing resistance movement that was spreading like wildfire through regions of space that had been under architect control for so long that many species had forgotten that alternatives to enforced stagnation were even possible. Sergeant Brooks worked with technical teams from dozens of species to coordinate the conversion of architect infrastructure to resistance purposes, as weapons platforms designed to suppress rebellions were reprogrammed to defend liberated worlds, communication arrays built to maintain control were turned into coordination networks for the growing alliance, and most satisfying of all, the harvest ships themselves were becoming mobile liberation fleets that carried formerly imprisoned species back to their homeworlds or to new colonies where they could finally pursue the technological and social innovations that had made them targets for collection in the first place. Dr. Thompson marveled at the scientific collaboration that was emerging as species shared discoveries and technologies that had been suppressed for millennia, revealing that the galaxy's potential for advancement had been artificially constrained for so long that the accumulated knowledge of the liberated civilizations represented thousands of years of compressed innovation waiting to be unleashed upon a universe that was about to become far more interesting and unpredictable than the architects had ever intended. The psychological impact on the architects themselves became evident as their communications grew increasingly frantic and disorganized, revealing beings who had become so dependent on absolute control and predictable outcomes that they were psychologically incapable of adapting to the chaos that human creativity had introduced into their perfectly ordered system, and their attempts to reassert control only made the situation worse as each heavy-handed response provided the resistance movement with more evidence of architect brutality and more motivation for species who had been on the fence about joining the rebellion. The irony was not lost on Captain Rodriguez that humanity's supposed dangerous unpredictability was proving to be exactly what the galaxy needed to break free from a system of oppression that had masqueraded as stability for so long that entire civilizations had forgotten what genuine progress and innovation looked like, and as the revolution spread from system to system, it became clear that the architects had created the conditions for their own downfall by systematically eliminating every species capable of the kind of flexible thinking that could have helped them adapt to changing circumstances instead of trying to freeze the entire galaxy in a state of permanent stagnation. The transformation was happening faster than anyone had dared hope, as former prison ships became the nucleus of liberation fleets that were sweeping through architect space with the irresistible momentum of an idea whose time had finally come, carrying with them the message that innovation and creativity were not threats to be eliminated but gifts to be celebrated. That diversity of thought and approach made civilization stronger rather than more dangerous, and that the galaxy was big enough and rich enough to support countless different ways of living and thinking and growing without requiring the kind of totalitarian control that the architects had imposed through their systematic harvesting of every species that dared to dream of something better than the status quo they were determined to preserve at any cost. Part 8 *. The final collapse of the architect empire came not through violent conquest but through something far more devastating to beings who had spent millions of years believing in their own absolute superiority, the simple recognition that they had been wrong about everything that mattered, as species after species demonstrated that creativity and innovation led not to chaos and destruction but to solutions for problems that the architects had considered permanent fixtures of galactic existence. Technologies that could heal damaged worlds, social structures that eliminated the scarcity and competition that had supposedly made authoritarian control necessary, and most humbling of all, collaborative approaches to galactic governance that made the architects' heavy-handed management technique seem not just unnecessary but actively harmful to the civilizations they had claimed to be protecting. Dr. Thompson found herself at the center of unprecedented diplomatic efforts as the liberated species worked together to establish new frameworks for galactic cooperation, with humanity serving as mediators and facilitators precisely because their unpredictable thinking patterns allowed them to find common ground between civilizations whose differences had previously seemed irreconcilable, turning the very trait that had marked them for extermination into the foundation for a new kind of galactic community based on voluntary cooperation rather than enforced compliance. Captain Rodriguez discovered that his crew had become inadvertent ambassadors for a new vision of what galactic civilization could become, as their willingness to risk everything for the freedom of species they had never met before became a powerful symbol that resonated across countless worlds where beings were learning for the first time in millions of years that alternatives to architect rule were not only possible but infinitely preferable to the sterile stability that had been imposed upon them through systematic suppression of every spark of genuine innovation or creative thinking. The transformation of individual architect entities proved to be one of the most unexpected developments in the Galactic Revolution, as many of the ancient beings who had administered the harvesting system for eons turned out to be themselves victims of their own rigid programming. Entities who had become so locked into predetermined patterns of thought and behavior that they had lost the ability to question their own assumptions or consider alternative approaches to the challenges of galactic management, and when freed from the psychological constraints of their own system, some of them proved surprisingly capable of contributing to the new collaborative frameworks that were emerging across liberated space. Commander Walsh worked with former architect administrators to understand the scope of infrastructure that needed to be repurposed for constructive rather than oppressive uses, discovering vast networks of transportation, communication, and resource management systems that could serve the needs of a free galactic community far more effectively than they had ever served the needs of authoritarian control, transforming tools of oppression into instruments of liberation and cooperation that connected previously isolated civilizations in ways that promoted understanding and mutual benefit rather than domination and exploitation. Lieutenant Morrison found his security expertise in high demand as the new Galactic Alliance worked to establish defense protocols that could protect individual worlds and species from future threats without recreating the authoritarian structures that had made the architect system so oppressive. Developing distributed defense networks that relied on voluntary cooperation and mutual aid rather than centralized control and enforced compliance, proving that security and freedom were not mutually exclusive concepts but could actually reinforce each other when approached with sufficient creativity and goodwill. The establishment of the Galactic Innovation Council marked the formal beginning of a new era in cosmic civilization, with humanity serving as the founding coordinators of an organization dedicated to promoting exactly the kind of creative thinking and technological advancement that the architects had spent millions of years trying to suppress, and representatives from hundreds of formerly imprisoned species gathered on a liberated world to draft principles of cooperation that emphasized diversity of thought, voluntary association, and the fundamental right of all civilizations to pursue their own paths of development without interference from self-appointed guardians who claimed to know what was best for the galaxy as a whole. Dr. Thompson's xenobiology expertise proved invaluable in facilitating communication and understanding between species whose biological and cultural differences had previously been considered insurmountable barriers to cooperation. But her work revealed that the capacity for innovation and creativity was a universal trait that transcended species boundaries and could serve as the foundation for collaborative relationships that benefited everyone involved rather than requiring some civilizations to sacrifice their potential for the supposed benefit of galactic stability and order. Sergeant Brooks became an unlikely hero as his intuitive understanding of harmonic systems led to breakthroughs in cross-species technology integration, allowing civilizations to share their innovations more effectively than ever before and creating synergistic combinations of different technological approaches that produced solutions to problems that had seemed impossible to solve using any single species' capabilities alone. The universe that emerged from the Galactic Revolution was chaotic, unpredictable, and absolutely magnificent in its diversity and potential, as thousands of civilizations that had been kept in artificial stagnation for millions of years suddenly found themselves free to pursue whatever paths of development their creativity and curiosity might suggest, leading to an explosion of innovation and discovery that made the previous era of architect control seem like a dark age of wasted potential and suppressed possibilities. Humanity found their place in this new galaxy not as conquerors or rulers but as facilitators and catalysts, their unique combination of stubbornness, creativity, and collaborative instincts making them invaluable mediators and problem-solvers who could help other species navigate the challenges of sudden freedom while avoiding the pitfalls that might lead to new forms of oppression or conflict. Captain Rodriguez often reflected on the irony that humanity's supposed dangerous unpredictability had turned out to be exactly what the galaxy needed to break free from the suffocating embrace of perfect order and absolute control, proving that the universe was big enough and rich enough to support infinite diversity and infinite combinations, and that the greatest threat to galactic civilization had never been chaos or innovation but rather the arrogant assumption that any single perspective or approach could be sufficient to manage the magnificent complexity of a galaxy full of thinking beings who deserved the freedom to become whatever their dreams and determination might make possible.